use the session later. Uh, Thank you, Mark, for joining us today. We will have more people joining in, and we'd have plenty of time for question and answers in the end. I'd just start by sharing a couple of slides that I have for you. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a second funding round by Freshwater Foundation for this year, and we have a few housekeeping rules. It's just an hour-long session, so there won't be any break. I request you to put in your name, your organization, and any contact details if you'd like to connect with people at this meeting as well as with the funder. Because due to GDPR, we won't be able to share details, but the chat would be something that you could take back with you, or we could share it with you. Do keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking. And as I mentioned, we will have a lot of questions, and which would be answered by Mike at the end of the session. So do keep a note of your questions. A little bit about the session today. Mark is the founder and the CEO of the Freshwater Foundation. He's been an Ealing resident for 30 years, and I'm sure most of you know him a lot more than I have, and have worked with him. He's not only experienced in charity and voluntary work, but he's also been a volunteer himself, and a teacher and a lecturer. This funding round would be for under £2,000. As I mentioned, the second round this year. And as Mark mentioned, if you've received any funding over the years from Freshwater Foundation, the funding would be available for the amount, deducted the amount you previously received.
Well, that's for the small grants, so don't worry about that. I'll go into that.
Okay. The agenda would start off with me welcoming you, and then we'll proceed with Mark taking over. A bit about the funding priorities. I won't go into too much of a detail because Mark has a whole presentation for you. The eligibility criteria would be voluntary and community organizations, and especially the organizations must be based in Ealing and Hounslow. Your project must be supporting the needs of the community for Ealing and Hounslow, but there are certain exceptions. Do read the guidance notes where a bulk of your work is done for the group, and it may not be, application may be considered where the bulk of the work of the group is not done within Ealing and Hounslow, but a substantial part of it is supporting the community of Ealing and Hounslow. Preferably, they're looking for projects that are volunteer-led, but if it has paid staff, less than 50% of the project expenditure should be on salaries. Projects preferably looked at would be projects under £20,000, and the organization's annual income again should be around under 50,000 or less. Again, exceptions to these.
Plenty of exceptions. That don't take too much. Yeah. Well,
okay.
Yeah, I think I'd probably best if I take over here.
All right. I'll let you take over. Let me just stop sharing.
Okay, I'll start sharing now. Right. Should now be seeing my slides. Did you all see my slides?
Yes.
Good. Right, okay, so a little bit of background about ourselves. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going back and forth between slides and various other materials back to our website to discuss the eligibility criteria. And we've got a few services and a few guides that we offer. And so I'll be going back and forth toward, between these. But I'll start out with a bit of background about myself and the charity. So as Noika was saying, a small grant-making charity based in Ealing, offering funds and various services to community and voluntary groups in Ealing and Hounslow, of the smaller nature. Now, my background is I was, and still am, a lecturer, a university lecturer in business studies. One of the things I taught was business studies. And I specialized in business planning and strategic and project management. But I also had a lot of experience in the voluntary sector with various groups and NGOs, and built up quite a lot of knowledge of management techniques and the sort of whole organizational governance side of the charity world. Anyway, so I received a legacy in 2015 from my mother when she died. And so being comfortably off and not sort of in need of vast amounts of money, I decided to put the bulk of it towards starting up a charity, a foundation that would allow me to not only to help support people financially, but with various other services that I felt perhaps we could develop. So that was 2015, but anybody who's set up a charity will know it takes quite a while to get going. We registered in 2017, but only really got going late 2018. It took quite a while for our name to get about. We needed sort of the support of Ealing Council and Hounslow Council. Once they started publicising us, then we started to really get going. And then 2019 was a really busy year. That's when we had our first 2 grant rounds. A lot of people applied. That's where we learned our trade as a funder. And we also started the small grant scheme, which I'll go into. This is just a history. I won't go into the details of things at the moment. This is just to sort of show you sort of how we've grown. As I was saying, I wanted to sort of develop various services that could be of use to the smaller charities. The idea being that some perhaps of the more sophisticated approaches that some of the larger charities were adopting were not available to the smaller charities. I wanted to sort of adapt what was available to the larger charities for the smaller charities. I'll go into that in more detail. But anyway, I developed a governance and management approach in collaboration with one of our former applicants and made a start on our impact assessment approach. So we did a lot of this sort of R&D and product development. We worked in conjunction with Ealing Council Community Management Team, with Evelyn and Tan and her crew on their Transform Your Space initiative. So that was our sort of first proper partnership with a statutory partner. And during our first 2 grant rounds, we were finding that we were getting sufficient numbers of applicants, but they tended to be from the sort of more mainstream, affluent parts of the boroughs. We were keen on being able to help people from the more marginal and perhaps poorer areas as well. They weren't coming to us. So we mounted an outreach project and we focused it in Northolt. That's near where I live, so it seemed to be sort of an appropriate place to start. And we hadn't at that time had any applicants from Northolt. Then the pandemic hit, so a lot of these things somewhat hit the skids, but we managed to keep going. We've had more grant rounds. We've now supported around 40 groups with our grant rounds and the small grant scheme. And we're getting more and more from the more marginal areas. So that side of our strategy is beginning to work. We've had a few from Southall. The last round we had 3 Somali groups. We hadn't had any Somali groups before. We've now had, I think, 2 from Northolt, apart from those groups that we're supporting, the sort of startup groups we're supporting. The government and management approach, we're starting to support people who are using that. And we completed the impact assessment approach. I wanted us to become something of a research hub, not to produce original research, but being from sort of a higher education academic background, I have the research skills and I have a certain degree of knowledge about the sort of social policy areas and social history areas of charities and voluntary groups. So I spent a lot of the pandemic boning up on sort of the academic background and on certain topics that I think might be of general interest, with the aim of producing briefing documents that wouldn't necessarily produce original research, but would take research that other people had done and put it in the form of briefing papers that will be accessible to people who perhaps didn't have that sort of academic background, but to which this sort of knowledge might be useful. So, for example, I'm working on an area regeneration, a neighbourhood regeneration paper, which explains a lot of the sort of history and ideas and initiatives that have gone on in the neighbourhood regeneration area, that hopefully will inform people who are working in this area and stimulate debate in the sort of broader civil society community. That was a service that I think sort of didn't seem to exist for me. You either were part of the academic world, and so that would be accessible to you, or you weren't. But this is sort of a lot of what we're doing is trying to be bridge building. It's taking sort of perhaps some of the more sophisticated areas and making them accessible to people. So anyway, I made a start on that. Now our outreach, we had to we had to postpone our outreach project to Northolt because of the pandemic, but we started up that again now. During the pandemic, I wrote a small startup guide and resource pack to support people. So we're now supporting 3 groups in Northolt, with the prospect of more, using that small startup guide as the basis on which we support them. And we've deepened our partnerships with community management at Ealing. We're now participating with their Future Ealing project. I think it's fair to say that our contribution to the Transform Your Space initiative in 2019 was minimal. We didn't make much of an impact there, but we learned a lot about how we could better cooperate. So we've got a deeper partnership there with Ealing on in the Future Ealing project, and we're now contributing a whole lot more. I think we've got the Lammers project here, who we helped with our small startup guide. Bud there, who I believe is at the meeting, who we had a little chat with. And we're also working with Ealing Council's regeneration department, because about the same time that we decided to mount an outreach project to Northolt, so did they. So it was sort of a happy coincidence. So we're working with them on that. And we've developed relationships with councillors and MPs, larger funders. As it so happens, John Lyons is now interested in Northolt as well. So we're sort of starting up a relationship with them about that. And we've got relationships with national umbrella groups like the Small Charities Commission. So we sort of had a slow start, but over the past few years, very busy. Making a start with our grant making activities, developing our grant making activities, and a lot of R&D and product development with the services that we can offer, and engaging with a broader range of partners, an ever broadening range of partners. So that's our history. Next 2 slides. The first slide is going to be about the grant making. That's where we'll go into detail about the eligibility that NOICA started on. And then the next slide is I'll give you sort of a thumbnail sketch of the services that we're offering, that I was talking about. So the grant making is much the same. The basic structure of the grant making is much the same as you will probably be used to. So there'll be a form to fill in, and it will be testing. The first thing it will be testing is are you eligible? So I'll be going through the eligibility criteria in a minute, because some of them are quite confusing. We have to allow a lot of flexibility to try and get to the sort of groups that we want to. And the sort of groups we want to are the sort of smaller groups, often the sort of startups, from all areas. We're happy to support from the more mainstream affluent areas, but we'd also like to be able to support people from the more marginal communities, people where civil society perhaps hasn't taken that much of a hold, or people don't have the experience. So to be able to capture as many people from all those different areas, the eligibility criteria has to be a bit flexible. There has to be a certain element of complexity there. So it's unfortunate but necessary, as I hope you'll see. But if you do have any difficulties there, then we're always on hand for us to have a chat. So if you're not sure whether you meet the eligibility criteria, you just phone me up or mail me and we can have a Zoom chat or something like that. Okay, so then comes scrutiny. Now, this is where we do differ from most funders, and this is the advantage of being a local funder comes in, is that everybody who is eligible, we pay a visit to. And it's very much, it's partly on our terms. We want to find out about you for the reasons that funders normally want to find out about. As I've listed here, your probity and your compliance to charity law, competence and the benefits that are going to be achieved. But it's very much a two-way street. We very much let you tell your story. We're very keen to get to know our applicants and the people that we make grants to, because we're very keen on developing longer term relationships, both from the point of view of the services we can potentially offer you, but also those things you can teach us. We're very much on the learning curve, as we'll see when we come to when I come to discuss the services that we offer. Yes, I bring a certain degree of expertise to this, but it's not going to be of much use without the sort of in-depth knowledge of the grassroots need. So it's very much a two-way street, the development of these services. It's the contribution of the grassroots, the applicants themselves, that go into the products that the services that we offer. So that's where we start that sort of relationship. And we're also beginning to act as a sort of a hub, a sort of a coordination, networking sort of hub for all the groups that we've helped. We're finding that's becoming a larger and larger part of our work. So we very much want you to tell your story. And that we find that works well. And I always find those due diligence meetings that we have, I always find them very enjoyable. And I think the people who we talk to do as well, because they're always keen to be able to talk in depth and at length about the sort of work that they do, and we're very keen to hear. So it's very much a sort of a two-way street there. Okay, so once that visit has taken place, I write a report. It goes to the board. There'll be certain conditions. If the board okays the grant, then there'll be certain conditions, but the conditions are of the sort of usual nature of the conditions you'll get for a grant, that you'll have to supply documentary evidence of payment, invoices and receipts. There'll be a monitoring visit later on. We'll expect some sort of a report. Doesn't have to be too detailed, but at least some assessment of the benefits of how far the benefits have been achieved. There'll be a monitoring meeting at some convenient time in the future when it's possible to, sufficient time will have elapsed for the benefits to have been achieved and to have been evaluated. So there's no great rush for that. And once again, the monitoring meetings are very much a sort of a two-way street. We want to see how things are getting on, if we can help any further, how we can deepen partnership and so on. Okay, so I'll come out of the slides and we'll go to the eligibility criteria, which I'll go through in some detail. If I can get this wretched thing out of the way, can I get this? I can. Okay, so if you go to our website, you'll go to the applications page, and this is where we've got the criteria. So as you'll see, some of them are rather long-winded, but as I was saying, that's to allow the sort of flexibility that we need to be able to help as many people as possible, as many people as we are as we're trying to target. So we fund any charitable activity. We don't specialize in one area or the other. And we like to have a range. We like young people, we like old people, we like arts, sports, we like social and economic. We like to have a balance. So any and every activity, as long as it's considered charitable in law. Now, it's generally going to be for a project work, for development or infrastructure. To put it in sort of funding terms, we'll fund capital and we'll fund revenue, but it has to be project-based. Now, as Nyoka was saying, we don't fund day-to-day costs in general, but we've made an exception because of the pandemic. We know that some people are struggling with day-to-day costs. So we've made an exception for the time being, and it's open-ended how long this exception will last. We're certainly not going to be in any great rush to close it down. And indeed, we may even consider for the long term, making day-to-day costs an element that we will consider funding, once conditions return to normal, but that's to be seen. But as long as there's some project element in your application, then there can also be an element of day-to-day funding, funding of the day-to-day costs. It's very much a new policy, so we haven't really sort of had much chance to see how it works out in practice, but in principle, we're prepared to do that. Now, the group must be based in Ealing or Hounslow, and ideally the bulk of their work should be done in their boroughs. But once again, we found that there probably needs to be exceptions there, and we've had 2 exceptions here. There was one that was a group that started in Ealing, but has now expanded beyond those boundaries. So they can't be said to be Ealing based anymore. But they were still a small charity, and they've been very successful, and we were very interested in them. And so to deny them funding seemed to us like penalising success, which we didn't want to do. So at the charity's discretion, which means at the board's discretion, if there is some other strong connection to Ealing or Hounslow, like the bulk of the work is going to be done in Ealing or Hounslow, that you started in Ealing or Hounslow, that you have a strong West London connection, but a project's going to be done in Ealing or Hounslow, we'll be willing to consider it. We don't want to exclude groups that we feel are successful, at the sort of groups that we like. They're small, they're startups, they're dynamic, they've got some interesting features. We'd like to be able to support them, so there's an element of flexibility there as well. Once again, if you're in any doubt about whether you may or may not be eligible according to these sort of rather complex rules, all you need to do is just get in touch with me and we'll have a chat. And we try to be as accommodating as possible. Strict maximum of £2,000. Now, the other thing is that once you've, it's 1 grant per organisation. So once you've applied to us for a grant and got a grant, then I'm afraid that's it. We can't fund you anymore at any time. This is because the amount of money that I was left was quite large, but it wasn't huge. We don't have vast amounts of money, and we want to spread our efforts as broadly as possible within the borough. So it's sort of 1 grant per group. But again, there's a slight exception there. We've got this small grant scheme, which any group, even an unconstituted group, can apply for. If you've applied for, so that might be typically just a group of local people who've got together, say for a littering project or something, or a greening project or a planting or gardening project, and they just want some small funds to get going, and they haven't even constituted themselves as a group. Let's say they get going and they develop bigger ambitions. We'd like to be able to help them. So if people have applied and been successful for money, applied successfully for money under our small grant scheme, then they can also later on apply under one of our main grant rounds, minus the sum we gave them for under the small grant scheme. So if we gave them £500, then they can apply for £1,500 under the main grant round. So it's going to be for the benefit of the community or some group within it. That's just charity law. Now, again, once again, with the volunteer aspect, we wanted some flexibility here. When we started out, we thought, right, we're just going to support voluntary groups, no professional costs at all. We found that was quite unrealistic. And we found that if there was 1 or 2 sort of professional people driving things, this could be a great catalyst, a great driver of voluntary effort. You need those central people there to organise and get a voluntary organisation going, and drum up the voluntary effort and organise it. So it's not a question of one or the other. It's having some professional input there, some paid people in there, to get the voluntary effort going. The latter is necessary for the former the former is necessary for the latter to get going. So, but we still like to see a lot of voluntary aspects. So 50% of the project expenditure ideally will be on, less than 50% will be on salaries or fees. And the project will be, the organisation, the project will be reasonably small. Projects under 20,000 or less, but we will consider more if other aspects of the project appeal to us. Basically, that's so that we can avoid getting involved in complex project management issues. So if it's a complex project, then that's sort of beyond the scope of our resources to be able to oversee. So that's what we want to avoid, because basically there's just, apart from the board, there's just 2 volunteers working. But say it was over that, but it was a simple project. So it was, then we might consider it. Again, we've got an annual income of 50,000 or less, but there are some organizations that we're very keen to support. So and in their case, it can be substantially over that. So for example, churches, for example, a typical parish church its annual income might be 150 to 200,000, but not very much of that will go on their secular and social outreach. So we take that into account. There are some other groups like CICs who have a very large turnover, but only a certain amount of that, the profit from that, will go towards their charitable activities. And there are other exceptions as well. So if you feel you are a small organization, according to our definition, or a startup organization, get in touch and we can discuss the matter. That's basically, I suppose the last thing is that conflict of interest and probity. We do ask for organizations to apply to us to be fully open financially. So if you don't have a standard set of accounts because you're not large enough, then we will ask you to produce a full set of bank statements for the previous year. And we are insistent on that. So please do be understanding about that. We, as part of our due diligence process, as part of the duty of care that we are under charity law, we do have to make sure the financial probity of the organizations we deal with. And we can only do that if we have a full set of financial documentation, be it accounts or statements. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. I think I'm running out of time here, but I'll just briefly go through some of the services we offer. Let's get this out of the way. So the whole idea with the services is that we produce some sort of a document, a guide, that we can then give to organizations that they can then run with. But in general, they're going to need to be supported with when working through that guide. It might be an area that they're not familiar with. They might not be sort of used to doing this sort of thing. So we'll give them the guide, and then we will work with them to help them develop their plans or whatever it is they want to develop. Also, these services are very much in their early stages. We will use our experience with these groups to adapt and develop them and fine-tune them. So the other broad point about these services is they have been produced in conjunction with people at the grassroots, with our former applicants. I just come to these with a certain amount of theoretical knowledge, so I can sort of produce a framework, but the content, that's very much a partnership. So our governance and management approach, that was done with a former applicant. That in that case, that most of the content is me, but fully endorsed by the person we were working with. Now that's perhaps not going to be appropriate to too many of you. It's appropriate to the sort of organization we develop with, an organization that had started up a few years earlier, had enjoyed very rapid growth, great success in their first few years, but they knew that their governance and organizational structures had not kept pace. So we came up with a governance and strategic management approach that would allow them to implement some of the more sort of sophisticated aspects of governance and strategic management, but in a way that was suitable to their size. So we've sort of taken a lot of sort of the expert knowledge from the great gurus like Mike Hudson and Roger Courtney and all these other sort of great civil society gurus, governance and management gurus. And I produced a methodology suitable for much smaller groups. and it's highly adaptable. So my strategic management approach is highly modularized. The original form in which I produced it is appropriate to a charity of a much larger size. But basically, it's a simple structure of modules, interlinked modules, to make it appropriate for a much smaller group. All we have to do is we keep the same structure, the same modules, but the content within the modules changes. It just becomes much simpler. So it's a strategic management approach I've used for much smaller groups. But basically, it's our way of supporting groups through this process of adopting sort of some of these more sophisticated approaches, but with the maximum emphasis on self-reliance and on customization to their needs. Of greater interest to you might be our impact assessment approach. We've had a lot of interest about this. A lot of people want to implement this. This is something, impact assessment is as distinguished from benefits assessment. Benefits assessment is where you would you're looking at a single activity. Has it done what you wanted it to do? And you'll have given surveys, had interviews, this sort of thing. Impact assessment looks at all your activities in the round, so as a whole, and do they not just produce the immediate effect you want, the satisfaction of your service users, but the overall impact that you want to achieve, that you've set forth in your vision and your mission. So it's a far more all-inclusive approach that a lot of the larger charities with their professional staff and the people who've got their MScs in non-profit management from CAS and London School of Economics and all this sort of stuff. So what I did was I took these sophisticated approaches, and once again, in conjunction with one of our former applicants, we developed an approach that was much more suitable for much smaller groups. And we had it QA'd by another of our former applicants, who is herself a professional impact assessor. She does it for the big funders like John Lyons and City Bridge. And she was very impressed with it. Self-praise is no recommendation, but the praise of a professional in the area is, I think. And she says, yes, it can really, small group, she herself leads a small group. She says, yes, she thinks this is implementable by a much smaller group than normally would take an impact assessment approach. And it would give a lot of the benefits of the more sophisticated approach. A lot of interest there. Less interest perhaps to people like yourself. To support our outreach project, I've built a small startup guide and resource pack. I looked for these sorts of things online from various groups, various local authorities, and I found that some covered some topics and some covered off other topics, but they didn't cover them all. So I sort of tried to cover them all in one overall guide plus resource pack. So it won't necessarily be of use to more established groups, obviously, but some of the later stages could be. Including, one of the things we include in the resource pack is a funders directory. Now, for some of the smaller groups we wanted to support, we were going to look for funders, so we went to sort of various sites to look who the sort of funders would be. And in general, on most sites, we only found sort of between 10 to 15 funders mentioned. So I spent about 2.5 of the most boring weeks of my life over Christmas going through a whole series of directories looking for funders appropriate for, suitable for smaller groups, groups that were perhaps maybe constituted but not incorporated. And after 2.5 weeks, I came up with 150 funders. So I'll show that to you. Let's come out of that. Yeah. So here we go. So it's a nice, simple to use funders. So here we've got. So the opening page, how to use it. But here's all the funders. So basically, you can more or less at a glance see where you're likely to be eligible, where you're not. So this will tell you in very concise terms if you're going to be eligible or not. If it looks like you could be eligible, you just click on the fund and you can have a closer look. So hopefully it's a much more straightforward way. You won't have to do what I did. Basically, it'll get rid of that sort of 2 to 3 weeks boring combing through directories.
I'm sorry, Mark. I think your screen is frozen to the screen to the services page. if
Oh, right.
that's what you're showing us, or is there another screen?
Oh, no, I'm not. No, thank you for, let's, hold on. Okay, I will try again. I think I must have. Can you now see a spreadsheet? Hold on, I'll stop the share. I don't think you can. I'll start the share again.
Oh, yes, we could actually.
Oh, you could. Okay. Normally I have a red line. Can you now see the spreadsheet?
Yes, we can.
That's it.
Thank you.
So there are 150 of these, and I will regularly update it. And basically, here are all the directories and listings. So there are some online directories there that we paid for a subscription for. London Funders, they had a long list. Charity Excellence, they've got a good list. Inclusion London, Disability Grants London Sport. All good directories, but it takes an awfully long time to comb through for relevant funders relevant to the sort of groups we want to support, the smaller group. Anyway, so let's go back to the slides. Sorry, I realize, sorry, Nyoko, I realize I'm running, overrunning a bit. But
Oh, no, that's a lot of valuable information, so we'd let you get on. Thank you for that.
Okay, so let's. Okay, social and economic indicators database. I also used to be, well, I still am actually, a computer science lecturer. And I also have my own business, my data analysis business. So I was collecting social and economic indicators for Northolt for our outreach. So I went to the census pages, web pages, I went to the indices of deprivation web pages, and it took me about a morning to collect all the information, all the census and indices of deprivation data I needed for Northolt. And I thought, if I can get all this data into a database, then I can just write a simple SQL query and I can do it automatically. And I have done that. So when we talk to groups, either when they're applying or during the monitoring, they just tell us the area they live in. I just feed in that area into my little program. And 10 minutes later, we've got all the social and economic indicators for them. And it's aggregated at a suitable level. So hopefully you can see that. This was one for, oops, what have I done? So here's social and economic indicators for West Ealing and Cuckoo Park. That was relevant to one of the, I can't remember who it was that we were talking to, but they said that was the area of interest to them. So here's all the indices of deprivation. Here's all the census information. Useful for funders because they want sort of chapter and verse on these things. Are you a deprived area? In what way are you deprived? It'll tell you sort of the makeup of the area. Also, if you're deciding on new areas where you want to spread your operations, this can tell you about the areas that are going to be relevant to the sort of service that you've got. And this takes me about 10 minutes to produce. So that's another service that we offer. That was a lot more enjoyable. I still like writing SQL. I'm a bit of a geek, I'm afraid, a bit of a nerd. I'm a complete nerd. Right, last couple of things, and sorry for having gone on. Now we're sort of sitting at this hub of 40 ex-applicants, and a lot of other people we've got to know, a lot of other groups we've got to know, and of course statutory groups like Ealing Council, Hounslow Council, various departments within them, councillors, MPs, so on and so forth. So we find that we're doing a lot of ad hoc sort of coordination and networking. So when we go to a meeting with somebody, a monitoring meeting or whatever, they might say, Mark, do you know a group that does this? And we generally do. We can put them in touch with them. Or we might think, oh, we know somebody who's working in this area. Perhaps they'd be interested in talking to these people that we know about. So we've done this at an ad hoc way at the moment. Obviously, we could do it in a far more systematic way. So we're looking at setting up a series of networking events where people can pursue their sort of common interests together. That's sort of very much for the new year, hopefully when we can meet face to face. I was talking about sort of being a research hub. It's taken me about a year, but I've been working on this area regeneration paper, comprehensive look at a comprehensive critical look at area regeneration, neighbourhood regeneration here and abroad. It's not merely descriptive what's gone on, but evaluative. It's helping us to determine what our approach should be in our outreach projects. And I think to a lot of people working in the more deprived areas, I think it could be of interest. One of my sort of academic specialities is that I have come to specialize in the past 10 years in teaching technical subjects, complex technical subjects, be they business or computer science, to non-specialists, to non-techies. And I've developed something of a specialism in that. I was running my R course yesterday evening at City University. And this is a highly technical topic in statistics and statistically and in terms of computing. But the people I was teaching were non-techies. That's something I've become specialized in. So I'm hoping to take that approach into some of these sort of areas that tend to be only approached academically, but to be able to explain them and to elucidate them in a way that is accessible to people who don't come from that background, who don't have that as a specialism. Anyway, so that's hopefully I'm going to finish that over Christmas. Watch this space. So, brief gallop through all we do. Any of these things that you want to have if you want the impact assessment approach or the small startup guide, just ask me and I can send it to you, no problem. And they're all free. We don't charge at all. But if I do come to a visit with you, if it does involve a visit, a face-to-face visit, I do insist on a cup of tea and unlimited Waitrose custard creams. But that's the only charge we need. Okay, well, I'll finish now and thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mark. I think there should be some cake along with the custard creams too. Thank you for bringing a total package of both funding and the services you offer and presenting it to us. I'd like to add to the data that you created, the data software. There is another E-Link data application or a web software which we also encourage using, because that's very visual, and for some who would like to understand how to use it, we've got the specialists come and give us trainings. Those recordings are with us on our resource page, free to access it, or if you can't find it, do send me an email. Ian, who's also on this call, supports Hounslow organizations with draft applications. So if anyone's looking for support, both myself and Ian are open to that. I'd now leave the session open to questions if Mark is open to taking them. And to put your hand up or click the reaction button, put your hand up, and you can go in and ask your questions. At the end of the session, I will put a small note in the chat for surveys, just your feedback basically, and I can't tell you how important that is, and you would know that for all our projects, just to get a feel of how the session went and how we can get better for you. So session open to everyone, and I will keep mute. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. I was going to ask you, as soon as we submit the application, how long it will take to see the results?
Yes, I'll mention that we've got a current grant round. The end date is coming up quite rapidly. It's the 31st of October, but I will say that we're sort of, again, we tend to be flexible about the deadline. As long as you have approached us prior to the deadline, it can just be a phone call, and we've discussed it, and it looks like it could be a goer. You don't have to have filled in the application form. We will consider you as having met the deadline. What then happens is we will have the meetings, and then the reports will be written. So the board meeting where the decision will be made will probably be sometime in February.
All right, so at least we can plan our project from February onwards. Thank you very much. But thank you so much. You have given us so much information. I'm really enlightened with all the information, and I will use it sensibly as well. Thank you, Mark.
Enlightenment is what we're all about. Thank you, Sanjeet. I'm more than happy to to be of assistance.
Thank you.
I've got my hand up. Can I ask a question? Thank you for that, Mark. It was very, very interesting, very helpful. I'm a non-exec director of a charity that does mixed martial arts for blind youngsters across London. We're very small, very small, entirely grant funded. We're originally started in Islington. I've now got us into Greenwich and Barking and Dagenham, and we want to come to Hounslow and Ealing. We teach martial arts, but we also teach inspirational speakers come down and we talk about self-confidence and that sort of stuff. We particularly focus on Bali individuals. Is that something that would fall within your purview?
I think we could. Well, give me a call. I'll talk about it. Yeah. We funded a group called the London Children's Book Project. They were outside of Ealing, but then they wanted to do a project in Ealing and Hounslow.
That's what we
liked them an awful lot. They got the award for voluntary service. Fantastic. The lady who ran it was the lady who did the QA of my impact assessment approach. So sounds like you could be in the same sort of.
I mean, £2,000 would pay for an entire year's worth of training and courses. So it's we've got no costs except for instructors and apprentices.
I can't make any promises.
No, absolutely not. I just want to make sure we're in the ball.
But by all means, we'll have a chat.
Super. I've got custard creams as well.
My man.
Any more questions? Mark, I think. Bud, do you have a question?
Bud, I think, is up.
Yeah, go ahead, Bud.
Thanks so much, Mark. Just a quick question. You referred to the social and economic indicators thing. Could you do us one for Lammas Park?
Absolutely. Just mail me.
Okay.
And I'll do it. Well, yeah, I'll do it this afternoon.
I think. Yeah, thank you. What do you need? The postcode or just
the general areas? It's. I don't know if you've come across these units, the MSOA.
No.
If you give me electoral wards, then that will be fine. Or just a general area. I might sort of spread it a little bit beyond, but just give me the general area, and that will be fine.
Okay. I think we've been a bit tardy in that respect because one of the reasons we weren't successful in our Make London application is that we were told we hadn't made a sufficient case for the need in our area. Now, it may well be that our area was not overflowing with that need, but nonetheless, we didn't address that. So I'm mindful that going forward, we really do need to provide better information.
Indicators really are a sort of a necessary first step. They'll show you whether there is a need in that area or not. You may have to do further investigation. It's not necessarily the end of the story, but it is the necessary first step.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, Mark. Thank you.
So just mail me and I'll do it for you. Just with some general idea of the areas.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I think we have Kofi who has his hand up.
Yeah,
Coffee from one place.
Yes. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Kofi.
Yeah, thanks for giving us an insight about the grant. Basically, I have a kind of a multiple question here. Is the grant just one per year or just one forever? Like that's
it's one forever, I'm afraid.
Okay.
We would like to be able to sort of develop a sort of an ongoing relationship, but with people through money. But the amount I received in the legacy wasn't that much, so we sort of want to spread it as widely. So it is only, I'm afraid.
Okay. And what is the duration of the project that you have to for? And
sorry, I'm losing you.
What is the duration of the project?
Oh, I see. That's a very good question. I don't know whether we've ever had to address that because the projects that we've funded have tended to be rather short. I'm presuming your project might be quite sort of stretched out over quite a long time. Is that what you're saying?
No, it can be short as well, but I just wanted to know.
We've never had to, I suppose on the limit,
Okay.
We've never had a long project. So I don't think there's anything in there, even in the, well, I'm sure there's nothing in there, in the eligibility criteria. we'd have to address it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, and when does it have to start? Does it start immediately in February when you get a result?
No. And especially with the pandemic, we're perfectly reasonable about that. In the conditions, in standard conditions, I think we sort of say something like within 9 months. But we'd had to be complete. But the work's completed within 9 months. Yes, so we do have a condition. That's right. But that's not hard and fast. If things get delayed, then all we ask is people to get in touch and to let us know that it's been delayed and the reason for the delay. And generally, we're very accommodating.
I'd like to add to that, Kofi, local funders. It's really important to have local funders at this point, especially if it's a new project. So even though you've received that funding once, it does help build your track record, which larger funders are looking at. So that's a big stepping stone, and we're really grateful to have local funders, support smaller projects. Would you have any more questions for Mark, or we could move to Finley? I think he has.
When it comes to monitoring, what's the criteria for monitoring?
Well, basically, what happens with monitoring is sort of standard. Is we want receipts and invoices, and we'd like some sort of a report. It doesn't have to be too long or complex. The sort of groups that we can support, they don't have that much spare capacity to do those sorts of things. Some sort of report assessing whether the benefits have been received. And then we will have a monitoring meeting where we will discuss the report, but mostly it's our due diligence and our monitoring are much the same, and it's more about getting to know you.
Okay.
But it's very simple, straightforward.
And that will be at the end of the project, basically.
Yeah, that's right. But we're not just at the end of the project. We want to be able to give you time for the benefits to be realised. Yeah. For the benefits to be realised, so that you can assess has this achieved what we want to achieve.
We have some resources on monitoring and evaluation on our website and the knowledge bank. I could share with you. This helps you not only keep your project on track, but also helps in not only after reports to your funder, but also to apply for new funding, which is quite important. Can we move to Finley? Being mindful of the time, we have Finley and I think Sharanjeet next. Go ahead, Finley.
Hi, Mark. Thanks very much. So just sort of following on about duration, really, I work with Creative People in Places Hounslow, and we, before the pandemic, we held an annual event in Feltham. It was a Feltham Fete, and it was on Feltham Green. It's just sort of a community activity day, really. And I was just wondering, is that the kind of thing you sort of fund? It is community-based, and, we are looking at it from a community growing perspective, but it is, for all intents and purposes, a one-off event. So I was not a project where.
No, we count that as a project.
Brilliant.
Scores in our definition of project. It's just to avoid day-to-day running costs, but as you've seen, there's also no, that's fine. That's be interested in that.
Absolutely, cool. Thank you.
We funded similar things in the accountable and needed. Very similar, sounds a similar sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, by all means. Fire away.
Finally, Mark, your direct contact number, please, if possible.
The phone number.
Yeah, please.
Okay, right. I'll just go. It's on the website, but I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you, Mark.
That's all this afternoon. I have a meeting with Bart's Hospital.
Thank you, Mark, for the presentation today. I will be sharing the session notes as well as Mark's information presentation, and the session will be recorded and saved on our website by the end of today or tomorrow. If you'd like to revisit it, I will send out a link to that too. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope the session was informative and you got what you came for. Thank you, Mark, again for your time and getting all that information to us. Don't forget to click in that link. Andy, I will send out that email, which would help you since you joined us late.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
and,
joining us.
so probably you know my colleagues Nash and Federica. Yes, so yes, I am just the other part that we never met. I met you on the other meeting few weeks ago, but I had another meeting. I work in the NHS, so
Oh,
unfortunately.
brilliant. Okay.
Too many meetings and yeah, but we do you have time that I can call you, or that we can discuss just a few things, because
Absolutely. Do send me an email.
I was
Yeah.
just saying, if further questions occur to you, don't feel free to, by all means, get in touch. I'll put the best with emails up. So
Yeah, email would be great.
anytime.
Yes, my email is in the chat. Do send me an email if you'd like to connect with me. And if there's anything else we
Yeah,
could
I
do
send
to
you. Yes, I
Okay,
send you the
brilliant.
email. Yeah, it's in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. It was lovely seeing you all and giving us your time. Hope we meet for the next meeting soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.